So I push open the door and walk into this kind of musty smelling charity shop, having no idea that what's about to happen is probably going to be the defining moment of this particular family holiday. We're on holiday in Ireland in a log cabin, and my family stayed at the log cabin there. My kids are at 5 and 7. They're just kind of playing happy, and I've got itchy feet, so I went for a wander into the local town stroke village. And to be honest, there's nothing much there, but I've got nothing else to do, so I started meandering down the high street, and I ended up wandering into this charity shop and start looking around. And then my eyes land on a little ornament. And my son at the time, his great desire is to grow up one day and to live in a little cottage in the country. And he's drew pictures of it and he describes what it's like. And I'm in this charity shop and I have a look and I can't believe what I see, because what I see is this. And pretty much it's the exact cottage that he would talk about and dream about. And so I decided to buy it for him. And I had another look around, seeing if there was anything I could find for my daughter. And there was a couple of horses, and she was really into horses. And so I picked those up as well, thinking nothing more of it, just thinking that's some nice presents for my kids. And I'm walking home with my presents and looking forward to give it to my children. And as I'm heading home, a little simple idea pops into my head, which will just add a bit of fun and lightness to the occasion. And so I arrive back at the log cabin and my kids have just arrived back in from playing outside. And I get 2 dining chairs and pull them up into the living room and sit them there, which captures my kids' attention because it looks a bit strange. And then I invite them to come over and I said, I just want you to sit on these chairs. And they sat on these dining chairs, these upright dining chairs in the middle of our living room, thinking this is a bit strange. But they're quite excited by it as well. And you can see they start to giggle and they start to shake. And then I say to them both, I said, what I want you to do is to close your eyes. And so they start closing their eyes and they start to shake a bit more and they're kind of giggling. And you can see their excitement levels are rising. And then they start peeking their eyes open. I said, no, you've got to have your eyes closed. And so they do that and they sat there and then it quietens down. And I said, I want you to put your hands out in front of you. And keep your eyes closed. So they do that. And by this time, they can't control themselves because they're visibly shaking with excitement. And then I said, I'm going to put something into your hands, but you can't touch it beyond just holding it. You can't open your eyes till I say go. And so Tom, I place him the little cottage and I lay down a couple of horses into Emma's hands as well. And they're staying there and they're just shaking like this. And I said, go, you can open your eyes. And so they open their eyes and they see the little tiny presents they've got, which obviously didn't cost very much from the charity shop. But the whole experience of having their eyes closed and sit on these strange chairs in the living room, it got them both kind of hyper. And so they were kind of excited and they hugged me and they said, thanks very much. And then tea was ready and we had tea and that was the end of it. Until the next day, and I got itchy feet, and I went for a walk, and the town was a bit boring, so I went for a walk along the river, and I was out for a couple of hours, and I got back, and I came into the cottage, and my kids saw me arriving back, and they started getting super excited. They started laughing, they started giggling, and they ran into the dining room, and they got these tall dining room chairs, and they're trying to drag them as much as they can into the living room. And I'm thinking, what are they doing? And then they jump onto the chairs and they close their eyes and they put their hands out and they start shaking and they start laughing. And I realise what's going on because they fully expect that I've brought them back more presents. And they think the way that you get presents is to sit on a dining room chair in your living room with your hands open and your eyes closed. And I hugged them both and said, I've just been for a walk along the river. I haven't got you any presents today. But they were just so excited by the idea. It didn't seem to bother them and they started kind of bouncing off away and I put the dining room chairs back to where they've gone. And I can just remember now that picture of my kids sitting there with their hands open, just excited at what they were going to receive. And for me, it's just this kind of beautiful picture of what it's like when you come and seek God. That we come with our hands wide open, And God just delights and he beams with smiles when we're like that, of just waiting to get something from God because we trust him, so we can close our eyes because we know whatever he's going to put into our hands is really good, and we know it's going to be good for us. We know it's going to be fun and it's going to be enjoyable. And it's a beautiful picture of what it's like. But here's the thing, that's a beautiful place to start in our relationship with God. But it's a really limiting place to stay. That it's a beautiful place to start, but it's a really limiting place to stay. That all relationships, if they're going to get to a healthy place, need to move beyond that. You know, in my relationship with my kids, as they grow up, if it's going to get into a healthy relationship, it's got to move beyond them just every time they see me, they sit in a chair with their hands open and saying, "What have you got for me?" The thing that starts a relationship is often that attraction of what we might get from the other person, whether it's a romantic relationship, whether it's a friendship, and the same with God. The thing that draws us is we see something that we could get, or that would help us, or that would be good for us. And you may be a non-church person, you may be just new to the Christian faith, or you may just be kind of exploring, or you're new to Hope Church, and you're in that place of need, and you're in that place with your hands wide open, that you need God to give you an answer. You need him to give you a rescue. You need him to get through what you're kind of you're going through just now. And that's a beautiful place to start. And God delights to see us pull up our dining room chair, sitting up with our hands open, our eyes just say, "Please God, please God." It's a beautiful place to start. But it's a really limiting place to stay. That in human relationships, if our interactions with our friends and with our spouses and kids are only about getting stuff, it really, really is a limit to the relationship. And what we discover from our story about Jesus today in our Bystander series is that God's got much more for us than just for us to ask him for stuff. That it gets much, much better than that. And we're in this series where we're looking at different signs that John records. John was a bystander, a close follower of Jesus. He saw a lot of the things that Jesus said and a lot of the things that Jesus taught, and he decides to record them. And he says, if you've been following this series, you'll know that John records them because he said these are signs, and they're signs so that you might believe and trust in Jesus. And by believing and trusting Jesus, you're going to experience true life. And it's this idea we've been exploring of faith's not just positive thinking, it's not just willing up belief, but it's looking at the evidence, it's looking at the historical account, it's looking at eyewitness and seeing who Jesus is and seeing what he does. And faith is a kind of response, a rational, intelligent response to that evidence. And we've been looking at stories from historical documents, and we're looking from stories of people who are experiencing Jesus right now today, and we'll have one of those at the end of in this service as well. And the story that John records for us today is in John chapter 6, and it's a very famous story of Jesus, where Jesus feeds 5,000 men and lots of women and children with only a small amount of food. And at this point, Jesus is in the Galilee area of Israel, and that's a very poor area. It's a lot of subsistence farming, and it's a bit about the way. It's not in the centre where the powerful, famous people are. It's a poor area, and Jesus heads there because that's the thing that Jesus does. He tends to go where other people don't go, and Jesus is there. And John records that it's the time of Passover, and Passover, it was a historical Jewish festival where they were remembering God's rescue from Egypt. And God rescued them. Moses was the leader, and God's people rescued them. And they ended up in the wilderness. And in the wilderness, they didn't have farms or any way of looking after themselves. So God miraculously fed them for 40 years with food that was called manna. And God would only provide them with enough for that day. So every day they had to be dependent on God. They didn't have a store for themselves. And that's kind of in the background of this story. And you'll see later on in John chapter 6 that the people who are there are reminded of this story because they talk about it. And so it's kind of Passover festival time, and Jesus is there. And he's got 5,000 men and lots of women and children, and they're all hungry. And Jesus decides that he's going to feed them. And all he's got is a few fishes and some barley loaves. And interesting that they're barley loaves, because barley was the cheapest grain that you could get in those days. So this bread that he's got, these rolls, are the cheapest of the cheapest that Jesus is going to use. He's just going to use something very ordinary from a very ordinary boy. And John calls this miracle a sign, as he does with a lot of Jesus' miracles. And essentially what that means is it's a sign. I mean, it's not just about the miracle itself. So Jesus is going to feed all these people. It's not just about the act of feeding and the wonder of the feeding. It's what that points to about Jesus. And John wants us to read the story and think not just, wow, that was an amazing miracle, but actually, what's the sign here? What's this kind of pointing to? And after Jesus has kind of fed everybody, he doesn't just feed them with enough. It says there was abundance. There was more than enough for everybody to have their fill. Do you know what I mean? It was an overflowing banquet. People were completely stuffed. And then there was too much left over, and so 12 baskets were gathered together. And so already this is very different from Moses miraculously fed God's people in the desert, where they only have enough for that day. It was kind of a minimum level provision. And here you've got Jesus providing an abundance. And people sense the significance, because they say that Jesus, they wonder whether Jesus is the prophet who's been promised to come, the rescuer, the Messiah that they thought is coming. And they read into this miracle that maybe Jesus is that person. And it says they tried to grab Jesus and make him take Jerusalem by force. They tried to make him their king who was going to take over Jerusalem and drive out the Romans. And in a sense, they knew Jesus was significant. But they kind of misunderstood where his significance lay. They thought he was going to be a violent king who was going to take things by force. And so they were kind of halfway there, but it says that Jesus slipped away because that wasn't what he was about. And then the story carries on, and the next day Jesus is around again, and it says the crowd are following him. They're kind of hunting him out. They want to find him again. I mean, no wonder if he did such an amazing miracle the previous day that you'd want to come and see more. And then Jesus, in verse 26 in John chapter 6, he challenges them, because he turns round and he says, you're not interested in the signs. He said, you're not interested in what this is pointing to. You're not interested in what I've got to say and what I've got to show you. You're just following me because you've had your fill and you want some more, he says. You're kind of sitting there on your dining room chairs with your eyes closed and your arms out, and you just say, we want more, we want more. The level of interaction is that you've just come to see what you can get. And Jesus kind of challenges them. And then they have a bit of a conversation about maybe the significance of what's going on, and they ask for a sign, and they talk about Moses as well, and what Moses did, and challenges Jesus to maybe repeat what Moses did. And then Jesus turns to them and he says this iconic statement. He decides to give the game away, if you like, and help them to know the meaning of the sign. Not just the feeding of the 5,000, but what did it point to? What did it mean? And Jesus says these words, and he says this, he said, I am the bread of life. He says, I am the bread of life, which is hugely, hugely significant. You know, what's he mean by that? I guess one of the things he's saying is it's not just that I'm greater than Moses. It's not just that Moses fed you with enough for the day and I've given you an abundance. It's not that I give you as much as you want and there was food left over for tomorrow. He's not just saying that he's greater than Moses, that he can kind of give better things, he can give more than Moses. He's saying this, he's saying it's not just about what you can get from God, it's about getting me. I am the bread of life. It's not just about getting food that I can give you. He's saying it's about getting me. And we all start in our relationships with God sitting on those dining room chairs with our eyes closed and our hands out, saying, give me, give me. It's what draws us from God. It's our need, that we need things from God. And if you're in place at the moment and that's kind of the state of your relationship with God, that's kind of where you start from. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. God delights to give us good things. He delights to meet our needs. He delights to rescue us and give us security or whatever it is we're struggling for. He's kind of a father and his heart overflows to give that. And that's a beautiful place for our relationship with God to start. But it's a really limiting place for it to stay. And in this story, you have Jesus meeting the crowd's need for food, but he's inviting them to, although that's a nice place to start, not to be limited by staying in that place, not just to come to get things from God, but to get God himself. He said, I've not just come because I've got bread for you. He says, I am the bread of life. And it's a sign of our kind of maturity in our relationship with God if we respond to that invitation, not just to get things from God, but to get God himself, not just to get things from Jesus, but to get Jesus himself. I mean, what are some of the signs that we're on that journey? You know, you can tell it in your prayer life when you sit down to pray. Well, you can tell firstly because you do sit down to pray, but when you sit down to pray, that you're less bothered about sitting there with a list of getting things from God, and you're more bothered about just being in God's presence and getting God. That when you're in your group and people say, should we pray? You want to pray because you want to be silent in the presence of God. You want to pray because you want to praise God. You want to pray because you want to thank God, that you're more content to be in his presence rather than just sit there to get things from God. That when you watch services like this or you come to home group and things like that, it's less for you to try and get things from God. You just want the experience of being with God. My kids are 16 and 18, that they're grown teenagers now. And a couple of weeks ago with my daughter who's 16, we had a bit of a falling out. We had a fight. I would say her behaviour was a bit out of order. And I was upset and we'd fallen out, and I went to bed late at night and went to sleep. And in the middle of the night, I'd got up, I'd went to the toilet, and then I'd come back, and in the dark, I'd crept back into my bed. And as I put my head on the pillow, there was kind of a crankle noise, and I was like, what is going on my pillow? And I put my hand on, and there was something on my pillow, and I picked it up, and it was this piece of paper, and I went and put my bedside light on, and there was this paper which has got all these love hearts on it with the word Dad in the middle. So it's about 2-3 in the morning or whatever, and I'm thinking, how did that get there? And I open it up, and it's a letter from my daughter saying sorry for her behaviour of what she'd done that night. And I put it on the bedside, switched the light off with a smile, and went back to sleep. And I got up in the morning, and when I saw her, I gave her a hug, and I just said, really thanks for your letter. I said, I love you so much. But there was something about the letter that just kind of niggled me a little bit. Because the thing about the letter is some of the language and some of the way it was written, it was definitely my daughter's handwriting, but some of the language and the way that it was written just didn't seem like how she would talk and the things that she would say. In fact, it seemed quite like the sort of things and language that my 18-year-old son would use. And it just kind of puzzled me a bit, and I didn't say anything to my daughter, but later on I saw my son, and I just said, have you been speaking to Emma about what she was doing and how she was acting last night? And he said, oh yeah, we had a good chat in the night. And what had happened, midnight, I'm in bed, they decide at 1 a.m. that they're going to make pasta together. So they kind of make pasta together. And Tom thinks that Emma's behaviour was maybe a bit out of line. And so he decides to step in and take the role of coach, the role of mentor. He tries to explain to her a little bit about parents and parents' perspective on things, and tries to help her see just beyond her own behaviour and her own life to see how it would be for other people. And he coaches her through, and obviously the words had an impact because that had led to Emma's response to write the letter. And I don't want to portray my son as the perfect teenager because he's far beyond that. I could tell you loads of stories that tell the opposite. But just for a moment, just for that moment, I got an insight of this son, this little boy who sat getting this little cottage with his hands wide open and his eyes shut, shaking, saying, give me, and getting really excited. Who, when I come in the next day, he dragged up a chair and he put it on because he just wanted to get stuff, that when I come, that actually he was now getting a broader perspective, and it wasn't just about what you can get, but what you can give. It wasn't just about getting stuff from the dad. It was stuff about contributing to the relationship. It was about giving to the relationship. It was about seeing what it's like from the other perspective. Just for a moment, there was sign of progress in his relationship. Because if you're in that place where you're just getting stuff, that's a beautiful place to start, but it's a very limiting place to stay. And what God wants to do for me and you, if we're in that start of that relationship, or if you're not a church person, God just wants to give you what you need. He wants to interact in your life. He wants to do miracles. He wants to rescue you. He wants to give you life. But then he wants to invite us on a journey where we get a healthy relationship that matures beyond just give me, to actually, I want a relationship because I care about you. I want to be with you. I want to see the broader things. And Jesus says that in this story. He starts off just giving them bread to meet their needs, giving them an abundance of bread, more than they can possibly need. But he said, that's a sign. I'm pointing you to something. I'm pointing you not just to where God's going to give you stuff, because he's got so much more. It gets much, much better than that. He said, I want you to get the point where you realize that actually it's about me, not just what I can give you, that I'm the bread of life. And Jesus says that I'm the bread of life. And if you get me, you'll never be hungry and you'll never be thirsty again. The irony is when you focus on not what you can get from Jesus, but Jesus himself, when your prayer time's not just lists trying to get stuff from Jesus, but to be in his presence. When the way that you think about Jesus is not just to manipulate him and use him to get your own needs, but actually to serve his purposes and be about what he is about. The old irony of the thing that Jesus says you'll never thirst and you'll never hungry again. That actually we get everything else thrown in. We get meaning and we get purpose and we get self-esteem and we get power and we get forgiveness and we get love, and we get all those other things thrown in, not just by sitting there trying to get those things from God, but trying to get God himself. And one of the greatest tests, I think, for us in whether we've run that journey to being a mature in our relationship with God, or whether we're still just stuck at the start. And you can be in a relationship with God, you can start with God and you could be there 10, 20, 30 years, but you're still stuck at the start. And one of the greatest tests is when we suffer. When things don't go our way financially, when health doesn't go away how we want to, when our relationships break down, when our kids are not wonderful, in those moments of suffering and pain, where essentially God hasn't given us what we wanted, how we respond in those moments is possibly the greatest sign of where we're at on that relationship scale, whether we're still at the beginning, where it's all about what we can get, or whether we've went on that journey of maturity to a healthier place. Because mature people who've grown a lot, when they face suffering, this is their attitude. Their attitude is they're not just about getting stuff, not just about getting rescue, not just about healing, not just about getting rid of the pain and making everything all right. That actually their greatest focus is this one to get God. In the midst of suffering, their priority is not to get relief, but actually to get God. And what the greatest saints during the ages have always found, actually through suffering, you can get more of God rather than through success. And that's why you find, some of the writers in the Bible and some of the writers in history, some of the wisest people will embrace suffering. And through that, they will get more of God, because their focus is not just on getting stuff. They're not sitting in a dining room chair with their arms open, just say, I've come because I just want you to give me loads and loads of stuff. Their focus is on Jesus as the bread of life, not just getting bread from Jesus, but experiencing all that he can give them and all that he is to them. And so I just want to ask you a very, very simple question as we draw this message to a close. Where are you in your relationship and interaction with Jesus? Are you someone that's still in that kind of child state of needing to get stuff from God all the time? And if you're new to the Christian faith, or you're still exploring it and you're in that place, that's a brilliant place to start. But if you've been following Jesus for a while and you're still in that place, will you listen to the invitation from Jesus to mature and to kind of grow into not just wanting stuff from God, but wanting God himself? And maybe you just want to use that mindset as you're in your groups this week, as you listen to this service, as you're going for your walks, as you're praying, as you're thinking. You may just want to think, am I someone who's trying to get something from God? Or what would it be like to get God himself? What would it be like not just to get bread from Jesus, but to get Jesus himself, who is the bread of life? And maybe you want to take that question and pray it through. Maybe you want to journal it. Maybe you want to ask other people. Maybe you want to put it in our Facebook group, your answers or the questions that it's asking. Because if that's prompting you, then the Holy Spirit is wanting to do something in your life. He's wanting to take you on a bit of a process where you start to mature, where you start to grow, and you start to get to that point where you don't miss the sign, you don't miss what it's pointing to. Some of these stories, that you don't just look at the stuff you can get, but you look to get God himself.
By your side, I would stay. In your arms, I would lay. Jesus, lover of my soul, nothing from you I withhold. Lord, I love you and adore you. What more can I say? You cause my love to grow stronger with every passing day. By your side, I would stay. In your arms, I would lay. Jesus, lover of my soul, nothing from you I withhold. Lord, I love you and adore you. What more can I say? You cause my love to grow stronger with every passing day. With every passing day.
Thank you for that message today. I don't know about you, but there was certainly some elements in there that was prompting me, something that we need to go away and muddle through this week. But now we're going to have another interview with Ginny, our interview with Jean Hughes, and I just really hope that this brightens up your Sunday, as all of the other messages have done. This bystander series and just listening to what members of our community have been through has really inspired and encouraged me. And Jean's is another brilliant one. So over to you, Ginny and Jean.
Thank you for agreeing to an interview today. Can you let us know who you are and how long you've been with Hope Church Oswestry?
I'm Jean Hughes, and we started 22 years ago, my husband and I, in Oswestry.
Great. And how did you find Jesus?
I started inquiring at the age of 15, didn't get a good answer, tried other things like Buddhism and all sorts of difficult books. Went into dark things, frightened me, came out, and then decided we'd have to move house because it wasn't right where we were. So we ended up Aberdeen, Northern Ireland, Preston, and Wales. And I love that song you don't like, Reckless Love, because God just chased me everywhere I went. And Northern Ireland, I began to find him, but it took me 3 years and ending up in Wales before I found him properly.
And roughly how old were you then? How long had you been searching?
I was in about 32 when I began in Northern Ireland with this missionary. I told my neighbour, who asked me to take her mum to this missionary meeting, I can't do that, I'm an atheist, I don't go to church. And she said, there's nobody else to take her. So I took her and said, oh, I'll come back at the end. She said, we don't know when she'll finish, can you wait? I thought, oh no. So I waited at the back and thought, I'll not listen. And I couldn't help but listen. And her face was radiant and she was full of life and she was about 60. And I thought, that's what I'm looking for all round the country.
Perfect. He'll get you in the end.
Yeah, it took a while.
You found him.
Mm.
Great. So what does Jesus mean to you now?
Well, I can't imagine not having him in my life now. And especially since Stan went to heaven nearly 5 years ago now. And after he had gone to heaven, the next morning I said, well, Lord, I know you're with me, but I need you with me every minute of every day or I can't manage. So every morning I start to say, thank you, Lord, for the sleep I've had. And I know you're with me because you promised I'll never, never, never leave you or forsake you. So what do you want me to do today? So that's how I start every morning.
Awesome. Quite the adventure with Jesus.
Yeah, it's the only way for me.
Brilliant. Would you like to share a story of what you've seen Jesus do in you or through you?
Well, he's answered 25-year-old prayers that we made, and we've had contact with people who didn't want to know us, warm contact. And only last week, that's another extra 5 or more years praying the same prayer for the same sort of people. And I had contact with my granddaughter and I had a lovely talk. And I just couldn't stop saying thank you all day for that. And when I was in this other church, I had a healing in the middle of worship. And I had my arms up worshipping God. And I was waiting for an operation to remove polyps down below. And suddenly they all came away and I felt them come and I thought, oh my goodness, that'll all be on the floor. I didn't look. So I just carried on worshipping and took a little glance down at the end when I sat down and there was nothing there. And I was healed.
Wow.
That was just one of the things he did. Yeah. Yep. He did loads of things.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing, Jean.
Thank you for asking me.
Thank you so much, Ginny and Jean. I really hope that inspired and encouraged you today and for the rest of the week as you go through your week. Now, as always, Hope Church Oswestry can't continue the ministries that we've been doing throughout lockdown without your generous donations. And you've been amazing over the past few weeks. We can't thank you enough for the generosity that you've shown for the NHS hampers, for our building fund, that things are still happening. As I said earlier in this service, we are just still moving forward. Yes, we are coming out of lockdown, but everything else around us seems to be carrying on. God has not stopped. And that also means that we need to carry on with our donations and our giving. So if you have felt inspired today, if you haven't given before, if you've given once before, or if you're just not feeling that you need to today, that is absolutely fine. But if you do, then can you please head over to our donations page. Thank you so much for your continued generosity. Like I said, we just cannot thank you enough. And that is it for today's service. So thank you so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure to share today with you. Don't forget to head over to Zoom after this service. The link will be following. And it's just a great opportunity to chat and meet with people from our church, just to gather and see how each other's doing, which is obviously really, really important. Just before we end there, we want us to remember that tomorrow is March the 8th, the big day that people in education have been working towards. As a teacher myself, excuse me, I am feeling a little bit apprehensive of my little ones coming back. I just really want them to feel happy and comfortable coming back into my classroom tomorrow. And so I just thought we could offer our prayers up for everybody in education tomorrow as some sort of normality is resuming. So let's pray. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for the words that you have given us. Thank you for the way that you have inspired members of our community to follow you. And we just lift up everybody in education to you. As this day, March the 8th, is finally here, I pray for the children that are at home, the young people that are feeling apprehensive and nervous about going back to school tomorrow. I pray that you would give them peace and that your love would surround them so that they are feeling confident in going back. I pray for the happy children. I thank you for those. I thank you that they are excited and looking forward to continue their learning at school. I thank you so much for all the families that have battled through home learning over this season. We know as teachers that it's really not hard, but we do appreciate everything that they've done, and I know that you do as well, Lord. So yes, we just lift up everybody in education. I pray for your peace, your love, and for your warmth just to surround them as they resume normality. And I also pray for the families left back at home that they won't feel too much loss as their children are back, but they'll be able to enjoy a hot cup of coffee and enjoy just a little bit of peace and quiet. So we lift them all up to you. May your love surround them and that you guide us all through this next week. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for joining us. Can't wait to see you over on Zoom later, and have a great week. Don't forget to connect with us in all those different ways, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.